Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Brand 2020. Today is September 29th, 2016. I'm joined today with Dr. Nancy Snow. Dr. Snow?
Hi, how are you?
Welcome back.
You look great.
Thank you very much. Speaking of which,
yes.
Japan's National Institute of Population and Social Security Research has announced that the population of Japan is not having enough sex. And we've already talked about this, the population declining, the Prime Minister trying to get the 100 million dynamically engaged. And when he says dynamically, I guess he has this in mind as well. Your views on that?
Right. I spoke to CNN recently, and of course, any story that has sex in the title or virginity, which the CNN story had, is going to go viral and be very global, as it did, and it takes on a life of its own. It's interesting, though, you mentioned an institute about population and Social Security. One thing that we don't know about the study is the specific questions. A lot of the story has just been, why is it that up to 40% of these young adults are not having sex? Well, the questions I found out recently have to do with male-female relations, and the studies sort of narrowed to either married or never married people. So it doesn't take into account divorced and
or single parent,
or even the LGBT. It's not really honoring kind of a spectrum of activity. The other thing that we know from research is that fertility, the main obsession is the low fertility. I don't think the government really cares about how often people might be having sexual relations, but they do care if it doesn't lead to any new Japanese babies. So there is no correlation, though. I mean, the low fertility has to be looked at differently than just the sexual activity. People are not having children here.
Right.
And it would be interesting to maybe look at how birth control is handled here. How many people in a relationship are they maybe using alternative forms to not get pregnant? And so there's a larger kind of landscape picture, but the titillating factor is this sort of virgins in Japan.
Right, so many virgins. I find it very difficult to get my head around that. That people in their 20s, 30s, sometimes in their 40s are consider themselves to be virgins. That means, it's not, 30%, that's huge.
Yeah, it is. But you also, it may be too that there is sort of a kind of a well-known humility factor here and reserve in the Japanese culture. So there's a cultural dynamic.
The definition of what virginity, no, I think it's rather clear though, right?
Well, sure. But you have to ask though further, ask the people as individuals. We don't know how many people are going to step out from behind this survey and say, I think the CNN story had a video, and it was a guy, of course, his profile was, he wasn't going public, but he was in his early 40s. And he said, I would like to be active, but I just can't find anyone to go out with. And he's sort of exceptional, though. I mean, we need to really have men and women coming together and communicating, because sex is fundamentally about communication. And I think the government, though, puts a lot of pressure on people here to feel like they've got to reproduce. There's something sort of kind of clinical about that.
And that pressure is more felt by the women than it's distributed to the men. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I would agree, and I would love to know what responsibility the men are taking when they do couple with the woman. Is all of the burden on the woman to protect herself from a pregnancy? From what I've heard in Japan, I don't know what the statistics are, but I've heard that abortion is quite high here. So you've got people avoiding having children. And I think there's probably more so-called sexual activity going on, but there may be a reluctance to really reveal that in a survey.
Right. Well, the whole deal here is replacement for any population is at least 1.8. The Prime Minister would like the population, the national population, to move towards 1.8. They're at 1.4 now. It doesn't look like it's it's really going to click if you've got this many virgins, and also so many people who really resist the urge to get married or to have a family.
Tim, I've said this before, probably many, many shows ago, but I don't know how people meet each other.
Right.
We live in Tokyo. It's a lot of people, thousands passing us by every day. But in terms of a social outlet, if you're working really long hours, or maybe you've got 2 part-time jobs, you don't have the social outlet of, say, going to a church or a place where men and women can meet each other. Because I ask young women all the time, do you have a boyfriend or are you involved with anyone? Just out of curiosity. I wouldn't ask that in the U.S., but I'm curious about this fertility and sexless Japan phenomenon. And they say, no, I don't, and I can't meet anyone. I don't know where to go to meet anybody.
Right.
They don't want to go to a meat market bar. And then I'll say, my own little sociological perspective is that in the United States, you would go to a setting maybe connected to your faith, and that's not going to be a strong parameter in Japan.
Yeah.
People go to the temple, but it's usually for high holidays.
Or maybe to the gym, right?
Maybe the gym, but also this is not a culture where people are probably going to feel comfortable approaching each other.
That's right. I mean, the Japanese are really kind of myopic.
Yes.
When they get into something, I'm here. I'm going to work out for 45 minutes. Don't bother me. I'm on my treadmill.
Yes.
Right?
That would be really abnormal to be going to the gym and then trying to date someone. Now, I do have an idea, though, because I love to dance. And I thought with these gyms, they ought to set it up for men and women to come together, do sort of a fitness activity with dance, and have them in a workout situation, kind of like Sex and the Single Guy and Girl. So make it kind of a joke, let's all come together and have fun, but no pressure.
Right.
And see by the end of the hour or so if people start sharing their meishi with each other. Because I just think that when you have the government with this top-down push to, we got to get the figure up to 1.8 per couple.
Right.
Sort of, what are we creating here? It just sounds like a machine. And it's a problem of the lack of social interaction. There are economic factors as well, cultural factors, but it's very complex. And until you tease it out individually, we won't know. But the aggregate data is what makes the headlines.
Right.
And I think that figure is a little high. This is a snapshot picture from the Institute. I wish that they would do some focus groups and really find out what's going on.
Well, I think the inescapable fact is that when people work in Japan, they work long hours.
Yes.
They work really hard. Whether you're male or female, you're on a career path. You don't want to be fired. You don't want to be dismissed to a lower active situation inside your company. And so a lot of the social things that you might want to consider go by the wayside as you're moving your career forward. And that means having children, at least for a woman, it's either one or the other kind of a situation.
And too, here with these statistics, they're pretty common in the U.S., increasingly in Italy, in other countries. So it's not just Japan. Japan gets singled out as this outlier and sort of in this kind of weird Japan mode. But the low fertility, at least that figure, is very common across
the developed
countries.
Nations,
right. It could be that maybe the lack of sexual activity is more accurate here. But I also think there's that dimension of not wanting to reveal, or maybe, depending on the question, not quite understanding, well, what do they mean? Because you may not be in a long-term relationship, but you may have been involved briefly, and so then you discount that. We play these little mental games with each other.
Well, I think it happens elsewhere too, in the United States, for example, but frequently you're with your group of friends and somebody says, yes, I'm going to get married. And who are you going to get married to? I'm going to marry her. And what? You were, I didn't even know you guys were together, right? So a lot of it is very much under the radar.
And also, too, Tim, don't you think that it would be hard for someone in an interview or a survey to admit that maybe he or she doesn't want to have a child or children because it costs a lot.
Right.
And there's still a lot more social pressure here to have children or to get married than, say, in the United States. And I do think that the costs are not often taken into account. What is the government offering people as incentives, as opposed to this sort of punishment of, we're not going to have a Japan someday if you don't, become more active here. It's just such a simple resolution that they provide, and they need to address childcare, a work-life balance, allowing people to telecommute. They've got to give people time to be at home. Right? Or a love hotel or wherever.
That's like far beyond the current situation where people just get together. I mean, even until just recently, dancing in nightclubs was not allowed here in Tokyo. You couldn't be dancing in nightclubs, dark rooms and music blaring and alcohol flowing.
Well, that is a much more critical issue to me than the low fertility. So I'm glad they changed that law. But no, you put it right. You see people out every night here in Tokyo.
A lot, right.
But I see it sex segregated. And it's heterosexual.
That's
but
true.
Nevertheless, it's very oddball to me.
Right.
Because I keep thinking it's kind of like they almost need square dancing here. They need to get people together and arm in arm and just get comfortable with conversation and communication. That's lacking. There's such anxiety. The CNN piece, again, it showed one of the resolutions was a guy who started the painting class or using the nude female model, and then it's all men there. And I told the CNN reporter, I said, why is it just men looking at one woman? That's extending the male gaze onto the female. It should be men and women and maybe having two models there.
Sure.
And so you start sort of laughing, you feel uncomfortable, but then you sort of open up and you say, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? What do you do for a living? I mean, it's just the old-fashioned kind of getting to know one another.
Right. Well, I think the reason why this topic just caught on fire on the internet, not only because it talks about sex, but it's kind of a window into this culture and how things work and why people always wonder, why aren't they having more children? How come the population continues to decline? And what is the government doing about childcare and creating opportunities for people to socialize? In the northern districts up north, a lot of times there aren't the women around. I mean, the young girls go to Tokyo, they go to the large metropolises to start their lives, and the guys are stuck there with the farms or taking care of their parents, and they're importing, male brides from, Korea or China, that sort of thing. And that's a huge population.
Right. But I think too, there may be an issue too that I know the government doesn't want to address, and it's this huge industry here of sort of fake or virtual girlfriends or partners that you really don't have to go to the trouble to go out with a real person, because a real person costs money. You have to date. If you're a man who may have gone through the bubble, and probably this population in this survey may be younger, but nevertheless, you feel uncomfortable, like you can't afford to date to lead to marriage.
Well, not only that, I think it's maybe a pain in the neck.
Right.
I mean, the distinction between male and female in this country is really dramatic.
Sure.
And mixing them and getting them together, I mean, they're different species almost. Right.
And I think outside of the big metro areas, the government's answer in these smaller, or in these prefectures with the smaller towns, is to set up the old-fashioned matchmaking.
Oh no, they do. And in the community center, they have the disco ball up there, and they're having a committee meeting here, and there's a disco ball there, and they move the tables.
I bet that's quite a party.
Yes,
not miss. I can't miss that
on Saturday night.
But there again, you create outlets for people to come together, and maybe outside of the art show that I just have different themes. So it's not just about coupling, but oftentimes what the dating coaches in the U.S. say is go do an activity. Go do something that you love, the running or the hiking. A lot of the Japanese do a lot of physical activity. I see them running around. Imperial Palace perimeter.
Mhm.
But and so they're in these running clubs, and that's a great way to meet someone. I do find that it's usually the case that the Japanese men are married. They have to
Mhm.
be married to either, I mean, most likely a Japanese woman. But the phenomenon, the challenge that I find is these young Japanese women who haven't met
Mhm.
a guy because they meet men who are already married. And if they're at the workplace, the men are married too.
Mhm.
I believe that some of the workplaces too were arranging dating for
Right.
singles as
Well,
well.
apparently the most popular venue to meet your spouse is in the work area because, I mean, they're colleagues. They, hierarchical situation. The male is a little bit older, a little bit more senior. The female is looking to get married somehow,
Right.
and there's an environment there.
But could there also be the fact that some women may not want to get married and take that traditional
Oh, absolutely.
route?
I guess so.
The women who are now doing the study abroad, I think
Mhm.
it's 6 out of 10 at least, with Japanese or female going overseas. And I sometimes wonder if they're doing that to take away that pressure that they feel to marry by a certain age, the old Christmas cake
Right.
phenomenon.
Married by
And
25.
right, so they go overseas to a society where it's accepted, maybe in the UK or the US, that you don't have to be married. You could be single. You could be not having any sex whatsoever. I mean, that it's really your choice. And there is another dimension here I saw in a lot of the comments on Facebook and in social media, and that is, do you want to have a lot of people outside of marriage having a lot of sexual activity? I mean, wouldn't you want it to be a little bit more
Yeah.
conservative or traditional? And I know if you look at the Abe administration, it's much more traditional values, and so it's like they want it both ways. They
Right.
want people to be sexually active, maybe before they're ready to be sexually active. And they have to first feel comfortable within their own skin. And I find a lot of young people, young women who have body issues, image issues, they look perfectly normal weight to me, and they'll tell me they're on a diet or they have to lose weight. Well, if you feel that insecure about yourself, that's going to impact your
Sure.
ability then to meet someone and to open yourself up and be more vulnerable.
Well, I think from the government perspective, it's an ends to a means. They want, the population to be more robust. They don't want the population to decline so much that they have to open the doors to immigration, for example, or even more distasteful, having women more physically engaged in the workforce, which is probably the direction that we're going.
Sure, I think we are, but I bring it back to, you've got to have some type of a social infrastructure there. You have to also take the pressure off of people so that they have a sense of, I'm looking forward to the future. Of course, I want to bring children into this world. And I think there's so much uncertainty globally and also nationally. Abenomics, there are a lot of questions about it. You don't want to bring a baby into the world when you're questioning that too much.
Looking at the demographics of the Japanese population, how they interact with one another, the Japanese population decline and the birth rate are windows that we peer into to kind of figure out what's going on inside Japan, how Japan works and thinks. Please stay tuned. We're going to continue to follow up on this.